In about 48 hours or so, Starfield is finally about to drop after 5 years of waiting since they first announced it at E3 2018. We're at the dawn of one of the biggest game releases in history, and you can get an early start on it now, so that when you crank up the game, you can come out the gates running. Nukes and Dragons is a character build and planet website that presents you with all the stats you can distribute points to let you build and save a character for reference when you jump into the actual game. Star Citizen players can compare this to Urkel's DPS calculator, or Coriolis if you play Elite Dangerous. Instead of sitting in front of your TV or monitor for 30 minutes choosing which stats you want to apply, build your character now so that you can just plug in the values when the game goes live, or at least read what each stat and perk does so you know the direction you want your character to start leaning into. Nukes and Dragons also has builders for Fallout 4 and 76, Cyberpunk, Skyrim, and the Outer Worlds. You can find a link in the description. What you won't find in the description is the link to videos showing the planetary boundaries, because Bethesda yanked them down. If what's been reported is to be believed, then we didn't quite get the whole story from Starfield developer Bethesda Games. Whether it was intentional or not, we all took fully explorable to mean without running into boundaries. But now that the cat's out of the sleeping bag and into the cheap whiskey, what does it mean for you when you crank up the game to go explore alien worlds? Let's get some context cracking. So 2 leaks dropped with players running a beeline away from their ship. One person was stopped 10 minutes into their cardio regimen before they could really even break in their running shoes. Another made it 41 minutes into the wilderness. Each ran into an invisible wall and got a good old pop-up message stating boundary reached, open a map to explore another region, or return to your ship, and underneath were the buttons for each option. So this seemingly contradicts a tweet by Senior VP of Marketing and Communications Pete Hines, who, when asked if after landing on a planet can you explore the entire planet, responded with, "Yep, if you won't, walk on, brave explorer." But it wouldn't make much sense for him to just lie when it wasn't going to take very long to get exposed. Well, did he lie? Or possibly his answer wasn't backed with enough exploration time? Whatever the case, it leaves a lot of confusion in the atmosphere, and the quest to get to the truth is on and cracking. There's a couple different theories about what's going on, or hypotheses if you want to get technical.
You bastard.
So scenario 1 is that these 2 players were still in the tutorial, and being in the tutorial, these were temporary bounties in place that only exist in the tutorial. It wouldn't be unusual for a tutorial to keep you within a specific range, especially in Starfield, where your starter noob suit doesn't have top of the line air scrubbing and thermal or radiation protection. The invisible walls could just be a temporary measure to keep you from turning into a suit full of chunky Campbell soup by the environment. It's a conceivable scenario, but you'd have to wonder why one person was able to go 4 times as far as the other. Scenario 2 is one that folks ain't gonna like, but as far as we know, isn't out of the question. In this scenario, the spherical planets are, as one person stated, an illusion. By that, they meant you pick a landing spot and that region is a random seed procedurally generated for that instance. In other words, the patch of land you choose to set down on didn't exist before you touched down, at least not in the shape that you see at that point. After you choose to land, a tile of landscape is generated with randomized features native to that particular part of the planet. If this is the case, then the truth of it's buried somewhere deep in Schrodinger's box where it both is and isn't fully explorable. Being that they're just randomly generated tiles of terrain, once you hit the edge of the boundary, the only way to explore more is to generate a brand new randomly generated tile by re-landing your ship and moving outwards. And that would mean you're not exploring across a unified planet, you're just conjuring up tile after tile of randomness. But if you go back far enough, you can find that this whole thing has already been addressed. At the beginning of the year, Todd Howard did an interview with Lex Friedman where he broke down how planets are set up way before this controversy ever arose.
How can we have a system to generate these planets and make them look, I'll say reasonable, as opposed to, fractally goop?
Well, what's the technical definition of goop? Fractally goop.
Fractally goop. You've probably seen a lot of simulations, whether they're space things or landscape things, where you're using fractals and just the landscape does not look real. It just is highs and lows and it's muddy. And so we did find a way. We came up with a way, had prototyped of building tiles, large tiles of landscape, the way we would usually build them. We kind of generate them offline, hand do some things, and end up with these very realistic looking tiles of landscape, and then built a system that wraps those around a planet and blends them all together. And we had pretty successful results with that. So we thought, we could do this.
So they are wrapping individual tiles around the globe, and it's likely that there is a boundary between them, whether you're in the tutorial or not. It's not a seamless experience to move from place to place on a planet or moon, but how often would you be running that distance on foot anyways? Presumably that's why there are no ground vehicles you could haul around on your ship. You'd run out of terrain pretty quickly if you had a hover bike to ride around on. Still, it'd be nice to at least have a slow rover to complete the Space Explorer vibe. But there is a question that remains. Going back to scenario 2, are the tiles randomly generated at each landing, or are they static? If they're static, then you'll have persistent environments, but you'll have to do more traveling around the planet for the resources you're looking for, especially if those resources are finite rather than respawn on each landing or play session. If they're random, that would obviously exclude major landing zones like cities or other story-specific locations, but it does mesh with the description lead quest designer Will Shen gave us about random quest locations being dynamically placed in any given area.
We have entire planets that we have to populate, so we actually have new tech to take whole locations that we've built and put them on the planets. Now you could say maybe you're going to an outpost and you actually discover there's a whole group of people there with a particular problem. Whereas, before it might be just a person coming to you along the road. Now it's an actual whole location that can be put there. And maybe they have a problem, like one of our members was kidnapped. They've been kidnapped by some pirates. We think they're over there. We actually are replacing a whole other location with that person in it and enemies around it. So it's a dynamically placed settlement that is taking you to a dynamically placed dungeon as you're walking through the planet.
So basically, at any point in time on a planet, you can just experience a random encounter anywhere.
So we know that Starfield has the tech to create locations where they didn't exist before. The difference being that these random quest locations are hand-built ahead of time, then brought into the area dynamically as needed. If tile terrains are random, then you won't be able to get to what you see across the invisible wall because relanding will randomly generate new terrain. There won't be any persistence, so that interesting rock formation or payload of tetrafluoride just out of reach beyond the boundary will be gone when you reland. But you can just keep relanding to roll the RNG dice and hope for more or better access to resources. But if that random seed is saved though, and from then on always applied to that location on the planet, you got yourself some persistence and the question becomes trivial. But what about your outposts? Random or not, these locations will stay the same once you start building on them. Showing up to find that lithium deposit your extractor was mining is now missing would be no bueno, my friend. If the size limit of your outpost scales with the size of the tiles, which scale with the size of the planet or moon they're on, you could possibly build a giant city. Maybe. In Fallout 4, when you created a settlement, you would hit an artificial limit once your settlement reached a specific density. Mods will bypass this limit and let you build till your graphic card gave out and you got a slideshow. We could see a similar limit imposed on Starfield outposts, especially on consoles where they're already limited to 30 frames a sec. Placing too many entities in one location could start to chip away at the performance. A year or so back, there were reports that they were having trouble getting past 20 frames a sec. So now that they got it at 30, it's likely they've done whatever's necessary to prevent it from dipping below that. Really, the whole boundary conversation is kind of dubious regardless. Are you not gonna play it because you can't spend hours running in a straight line? There's a loading screen between indoors and outdoors. Same with your ship. Does that matter as well? Starfield is gonna have some limitations. It'd be cooler if it didn't, but building a bona fide sim that's also an RPG is a little out of the question for a company that wants to make more games soon. That's just how it goes when you're not spending over a decade building what's never been attempted before. We're getting a game that's ready to ship, most likely in need of a few patches, but most likely the best new experience we've seen in a long time. And that's not me throwing shade at any other game. That's celebrating these current times where more and more space games roam the earth. It wasn't so long ago when gaming was devoid of space games. So embrace what Bearded Barnstormer calls the rebirth, the space renaissance. Now go ahead and check this video out right now. Right now.